Happy Saturday, everyone. We are tracking a rapidly evolving storm system as it looks to continue to remain busy all the way through the end of March. So let's take a look at the latest satellite picture this morning. Southern Florida has just been inundated for those areas around Marco Island, down there towards Naples, back into Miami, into Fort Lauderdale. Those areas have received 2 to 5 inches of heavier rainfall, and that's continuing to lift up the coast. They do have flood watches in place, and then heavy snows those areas into Vermont and New Hampshire as well as into Maine, while more significant system and a trough ejection that will be diving into the middle of the country, and that will set the stage for multiple rounds of severe storms and even blizzard-like conditions with very heavy snowfall. So I appreciate all my subscribers out there. If you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and you're in. You get all my daily content on this channel, and I would love to reach 250,000 subscribers by the end of the April. You can help me get there by subscribing to the channel and following all my daily breakdowns. So here's the setup on the hazard map. We do have some winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings in place. This is where the heavier rainfall is going to be along the coastal regions with those flood watches, but the heavier snows in the northern interior, and then back behind it, an even more significant system will be highlighted across Montana, back through the Dakotas, but especially there into Minnesota here and portions of Wisconsin. Further to the south, that's just the last thing they need is high wind watches and warnings. But unfortunately, we are going into the windiest time of the year. April is actually the windiest month. So we do have fire weather watches in place for those areas into the Texas Panhandle, along with a rapidly deepening low pressure center that will likely take shape during the day on Sunday. But right now, here's where we stand. We got the rainfall down there in southern Florida, and that's traversing up the East Coast. It's very heavy rain in those areas into portions of Virginia, back into upstate New York, getting into New Jersey. And then once you get up the coast here, we see a little changeover effect, but then that all changes quickly to all snow up into upstate New York, back into Vermont and New Hampshire, and especially there into Maine. Back behind it, a little bit more significant system, the beginning stages of it all kind of coming together, and it will start to come together during the day on Sunday. But right now we're dealing with that very heavy rain, especially along the coastal area. We got the warm front lifting north. That's why any little changeover you've seen this morning is rapidly changing to all rain along the coastal areas. We do have potentially moderate to heavy rainfall, and we could be looking at least some minor flooding along this region right here. So that's where we are concerned about anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of heavier rainfall over the course of the day. But here's the main event, is our winter storm, folks. And yes, we're talking about a significant March winter storm is on the table. Looks to start to take shape tomorrow afternoon. We already have very high winds in place. There's high wind watches and warnings. Some of these areas could have some peak wind gust approaching almost 70 miles an hour, folks, and some of these higher wind gusts, but it's going to be very windy just to the right of this rapidly developing low pressure center. So anywhere from Bismarck all the way down to Texas, we could be looking at some very high winds, and we can even be looking at some blizzard-like conditions in portions of Nebraska, swinging up into the Dakotas, with that blinding, drifting, heavy snow, and that hazardous travel is definitely on the table. We could be looking at a massive swath of moderate to major impacts on the winter storm severity index. So this is a significant event, no doubt, as they'll be looking at some very intense, heavy snowfall. It's all complements of this rapidly developing trough. This really extended trough ejection will be diving further south, and then out ahead of it in the warm sector, once we hit I think about 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, I think that's where things get going. That's when the low pressure center starts to actually get below 980 millibar low pressure. That could be a significant event, and we start to look at some arcing supercells start to develop right there in that warm sector as you have the moisture surging well to the north. So here's the latest update from the SPC, and I think we're going to be seeing an enhanced risk for especially for those areas in the northern Oklahoma, especially there into Kansas. But right now we are looking at supercell thunderstorms likely to initiate right around 4 o'clock within the warm sector into western Oklahoma, western Kansas there. And we do have a tornado threat along that region, and that could be looking at some significant hail threat as well, with all that colder air aloft as that's coming in from the northwest to the southeast. So I think things get going around 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And here's the setup by 6. There's the kind of the arcing shape of these supercell natures. And we look at the helicity index, pretty significant parameters on the table for western Oklahoma down there into central and western Kansas. That's where we could be looking at some of those 2-inch or greater hailstones coming out of the sky, and we got a lot of low-level shear, a lot of surface-based instability that would promote a tornado threat within that warm sector. So we definitely concerned, and that's why we do have some of that higher elevated risk for tornadoes possibly, especially as we get to between 4 and 10 o'clock tomorrow on Sunday. So here's the latest NAM, and yeah, the NAM wants to bring it actually down to a 978 millibar low pressure. And this is the initiation around 4 or 5 o'clock. We could be looking at some little isolated supercell thunderstorms start to bubble up within western Oklahoma and western Kansas, but it's all about the snow and the blizzard-like conditions will start to unfold up there in portions of Colorado, down there into Nebraska, but eventually swinging all the way into the Dakotas, and that blinding heavy snows will start to unload into Minnesota and northern portions of Wisconsin as we get deeper into the day on Sunday. But there's the moisture surge coming all the way from the Gulf, lifts into Oklahoma. We've seen plenty of tornadic activity this year so far with dew points right around into the 50s. So yeah, and this surge goes well north all the way up into Nebraska. I think this is actually where the low pressure will be to the right of there. There's the warm sector. So you got the northwest side of that. That's where all the heavy snow is going to unload. And then the southern tier, that's where all the severe threat is going to unload starting on about Sunday around 4 o'clock. But once we get into 10, that continues to move off to the east, and we are going to have a little bit of a tail on the southern side. This could be a little squall line that comes through Texas, not as significant as what you're going to be seeing in Oklahoma and Kansas, but this could definitely have some gustier winds, some downburst winds, definitely some heavier rainfall, and that could be just kind of a skinny squall line that gets going around 10 o'clock that will move through into the overnight hours with some strong, to elevated wind gusts. But it's all about the snow to the northwest. So we could be, getting some snow really start to unload. You can see the tight isobars. That's definitely an indication where we could be looking at some of those higher wind gusts. That's why we got all the parameters in place. And I think it drops to a 978, but then continues to, as it lifts northeast, it will start to weaken, but it still will be packing a punch with all the heavier snows through the Dakotas, back into South Dakota, as well as into central and northern Minnesota. And eventually this does swing in fact, into central and northern Wisconsin as well, heading into that Monday time frame. But further to the south, it's going to be an overnight event, and once we hit into East Texas into Monday morning, that's where the squall line will be. But once we hit in the afternoon, the intensity does go back up again, so you have a little bit more moisture to work with further south into the southeast. Those areas do in fact have a slight risk for severe storms to unload into Arkansas, as well as into Louisiana, back into Mississippi, as portions of Alabama here. We could be looking at all three modes of severe storms. Definitely concerned about some larger hail as well, and that could extend as far north as Iowa and getting into portions of northern Illinois, as well, as you'll still be on the right side of that warm sector of that low pressure center, as just all snow up there into Minnesota. But here's the severity index on the winter storm index. So we've got a pretty significant event on the table for late March. So we got the snow this morning up there into New England, especially northern Maine. But here's the second system that will start to take shape on Sunday, heading into Monday. So there's a widespread swath of moderate impacts all the way to major impacts once you get into portions of eastern South Dakota, as well as into central and into northern Minnesota. And yes, that does include the Minneapolis region, and that will extend into Wisconsin. But here's the snowfall still yet to come. This area has already seen a lot of snowfall. In fact, some of these areas yesterday in the northern Illinois actually overperformed. There was a very sharp gradient. Some of these areas got 9 inches of snow, and then about 50 miles south, nothing. So that's what happened yesterday. And with these type setups, that's easily what could happen. So, you know, it's like, hey, oh, that busted, and then it overperformed, and you only live about 50 miles, you know, away from each other. That's what we get with these sharp gradient systems that will likely unfold. So yeah, we could be looking at some significant totals up here into the Dakotas and Minnesota. But if you live just outside of there, we could be looking at maybe 1 to 3 inches, right? And so that wouldn't be significant. But some of these totals further north could be looking at 12, 18, even some 2-foot totals are definitely not out of the question. So, but going into Tuesday, I don't think the severe threat as is intense. So the main event is going to be Sunday into Monday. But once we swing into Tuesday, I think these are going to be just kind of borderline severe once they hit into Alabama, back into Georgia, with really just very heavy rainfall and unloading in this region, as the snow will continue to try to wind itself down even into Tuesday morning as this continues to shift off into the east. And so by the time we head into Wednesday, that continues to shift off. Yes, more rain for the East Coast. That's the last thing you need, as that storm system will kind of be weakening and losing its luster. But as soon as this moves out, there's another one that will be coming in off the West Coast, and that could set the stage for more heavy snowfall. As yes, we have another dynamic trough that will be digging in off the West Coast, and we could be looking at, you know, I don't think the same intensity, but almost like a deja vu type setup as we head towards the end of March. This is the 30th. More cold air out west, warm sector in the middle of the country, a rapidly developing low pressure could set the stage for more heavy snowfall for Colorado there, into Nebraska and back through Iowa, and eventually that will swing back into Minnesota again. And that's as we end the month of March. That would be fact on Easter Sunday, folks. So yes, we could be looking at a fairly significant event again by the end of the month, and that would bleed through April 1st down there into Texas, then into Oklahoma, possibly another squall line that will be moving across. So it looks to remain pretty busy over between now and the end of the month. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update. Wire protect you before and after the storm.